So I showed her, I don't owe you commitment. My wife said she didn't owe me intimacy. So I showed her what life looks like when I stop owing love, effort, and commitment. Her words echoed in my mind. I don't owe you intimacy. I sat there, staring into nothing, trying to understand how we had gotten to this point. And that's when it hit me. Maybe I didn't owe her anything anymore either. What happened next was inevitable. We were in the middle of yet another pointless argument, something that had been happening more and more lately. It all started over something trivial, me asking if she wanted to spend time together that night. I thought I was being considerate, offering to put work and distractions aside to focus on us. But instead of gratitude, I got a cold, sharp response. Her tone was icy, almost rehearsed. I don't owe you intimacy. She said it with her arms crossed, her eyes locked on mine, as if daring me to contradict her. At first, I thought I had misheard. I blinked, trying to process what had just come out of her mouth. What? I asked, half laughing, half nervous. What does that even mean? She didn't even hesitate. It means exactly what it sounds like, she replied bluntly. I'm tired of you acting like it's an obligation. Just because we're married doesn't mean I owe you anything. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. We had been married for 8 years. 8 years of sacrifices, sleepless nights, and extra hours at work to give us the life we had. And now, she was standing in front of me, telling me to my face that my feelings and needs didn't matter. That the pillars of our marriage, trust, intimacy, partnership, were optional. I wanted to argue, to tell her how much it hurt, how rejected I felt. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I just stood there, staring at her, as if a stranger had taken my wife's place. The argument didn't last long. She walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself she was just stressed or having a bad day. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't the first time she had made me feel like I didn't matter. It was just the first time she had said it so clearly. That night, I barely slept, replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. Had I missed the signs? Had I done something to push her away? Or had I been fooling myself all along, believing we were still a team? When the sun came up, my frustration had turned into something else. Determination. If she believed she didn't owe me intimacy, then maybe I didn't owe her the endless sacrifices I made to keep our marriage afloat. I wasn't going to keep feeling like a beggar in my own relationship. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I started paying attention. I watched how we interacted, how she treated me, how little she seemed to care about the effort I put into our life together. And the more I noticed, the more convinced I became that something had to change. But I still didn't know exactly what. All I knew was that I wasn't going to let her words define my worth. The days after that conversation felt different. Something inside me had shifted. I started to see our marriage from a new perspective, not as a partnership, but as a constant balancing act where I was always the one giving more just to keep things stable. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I remember the nights I worked overtime so we could afford the down payment on our house. Back then, she used to say how proud she was, how lucky she felt to have someone who cared so much about our future. I held on to those words like fuel, pushing myself harder because I believed I was doing it for us. But looking back now, it felt like my sacrifices had meant nothing the moment they stopped being convenient for her. And it wasn't just about money. It was about the little things. The times I canceled plans with friends because she said she needed me at home. The weekends I spent fixing things around the house, handling chores to make her life easier. Even the nights I stayed up late, listening to her vent about work, because I didn't want her to feel alone. Intimacy, to me, wasn't just about the bedroom. It was connection. It was knowing that my efforts weren't taken for granted. But apparently, that was too much to ask. I started keeping a sort of mental tally of the imbalances. I didn't write it down, but I logged it in my mind. I noticed every time she ignored me or minimized something important to me. Like the night I came home excited about a new project at work, and she barely looked up from her phone. Or the day I made her favorite dinner after a stressful week, and all I got was a mumbled thanks before she walked out of the kitchen. I don't think she even noticed how I was pulling away. Maybe that was the worst part, how easy it was for her not to notice. One night I sat in my car, parked in front of our house, staring at the darkened windows, wondering if it was even worth going inside. It was a ridiculous thought, After all, it was my house too. But I felt like a visitor, like someone whose presence made no real difference. I thought about what she had said, that she didn't owe me intimacy. And for the first time, I let myself ask the question I had been avoiding. What did she owe me then? Respect? Appreciation? Companionship? Or had all of that been just something I imagined existed between us? I started remembering the early days of our relationship, when we couldn't keep our hands off each other and talked about everything. I missed that version of us. But the more I tried to picture it, the more it felt like it belonged to a completely different life. That night, I didn't go inside right away. I sat there, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror, trying to recognize the man staring back at me. He wasn't the same guy full of dreams and plans who had gotten married all those years ago. What I saw was someone tired, someone who had spent years pouring himself into a relationship that had stopped giving anything back. And then I realized something. I wasn't angry about what she had said. I was angry because, deep down, I knew she was right. She didn't owe me intimacy. But if that was true, then maybe I didn't owe her this version of me that kept bending over backward to hold our marriage together. That night, when I finally walked through the door, I felt different. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just tired. Tired of trying to fix something she didn't even seem to notice was broken. And as much as that realization hurt, it also brought a strange sense of clarity. If she truly believed she didn't owe me intimacy, then maybe I didn't owe her all the sacrifices and compromises I had been making for years. The changes started subtly. I stopped asking her how her day was, not out of spite, but because I realized I no longer cared to hear the same rehearsed complaints about her coworkers or deadlines. For the first time, I wanted to see what would happen if I stopped trying to keep the conversation alive, if I stopped being the one who always filled the silence. At first, I don't think she even noticed. She was so used to me carrying the weight of our interactions that my distance just blended into the background. I'd sit in the living room, scrolling through my phone or flipping through TV channels, and she barely looked up. But as the days passed, I saw that it started to bother her. She began making little comments. "You've been really quiet lately. Is everything okay?" I would just shrug and change the subject. I didn't give her space to turn it into an argument or twist it back onto me. And I could tell it was getting to her. She started picking at me, criticizing how I folded the laundry, complaining that I hadn't filled the gas tank, even accusing me of being distracted in conversations we weren't even having. But instead of reacting, I let her words pass right through me. I wasn't going to play that game anymore. And then something strange happened. She started trying. At first, it was subtle. She'd bring me coffee when I was working late, suggest we watch a movie together like we used to. But instead of clinging to those small gestures as if they were major breakthroughs, I let them sit in the air unanswered. Not to punish her, but because I needed to know if they were real, or just another way to cover up the problems without actually fixing them. The tension grew every day. She reached for me, and I pulled back just enough to keep her uncertain. And the more she tried to regain control, the clearer it became. She had no idea what to do when I stopped being the only one holding everything together. One night, she asked me directly, "Are you angry with me?" Her voice was softer than usual, as if she feared the answer. I looked at her and said what I had been holding back since that argument. "I'm just tired of trying harder than you." I saw how those words hit her like a slap. She opened her mouth to respond, but for the first time, she said nothing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. Not because I won an argument, but because I had finally stopped apologizing for wanting more than she was willing to give. The next morning, after telling her I was tired of trying more than she was, the atmosphere in the house was impossible to ignore. She was quieter than usual, but it wasn't the cold, indifferent silence that had dominated for years. It was something different, uneasy, as if she was waiting for me to give in and explain everything. But I didn't give in. I went on with my routine as if nothing had changed. I made coffee, checked my emails, and left for work without even looking at her. And then the text messages started. Around noon, I received the first one. "We need to talk." I ignored it. Shortly after, another came. "Seriously, we can't act like this isn't happening." I didn't respond. When I got home, she was already there, pacing back and forth in the living room like a caged animal. It was clear she had rehearsed the speech she was about to give. But I waited for her to speak first. What do you want? I asked, throwing my keys on the counter. Her eyes narrowed. What do I want? Are you kidding? You're the one acting like a stranger in our own house. I want to know what's going on with you. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was unbelievable. What's going on with me? Really? I'm just following your example, babe. You made it very clear what this marriage is, and isn't the night you said you didn't owe me intimacy. Her face turned red, and for a moment, I thought she was going to deny what she'd said. But she didn't deny it. Instead, she got defensive. And I don't owe you. I have the right to set boundaries. And if you can't handle that, maybe the problem is yours, not mine. I felt the rage bubbling up, but I swallowed it. I wasn't going to let this turn into another shouting match where nothing would get resolved. You're right, I said calmly. You don't owe me intimacy. But tell me something. Do I owe you commitment? Do I owe you loyalty? Do I owe you anything beyond basic civility? Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw something break in her expression, fear. She didn't respond, so I continued. Because if we're going to play by those rules, maybe I don't owe you date nights, emotional support, or even coming home at the end of the day. Maybe I don't owe us being a priority either, since you made it clear we're not one for you. Then she exploded. That's not fair. You're exaggerating everything. I just wanted space. I never said I don't care about you. Then prove it, I retorted. Because right now, all I see is someone who wants the benefits of marriage without making the effort to maintain it. The room went silent. She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I waited, giving her the chance to fight for us, to show me I was wrong. But she didn't. Instead, she collapsed on the couch, burying her face in her hands. I don't know how we got here, she whispered. And honestly, I didn't know either. Lo único que tenía claro era que la mujer sentada frente a mí no es parecía a la persona con la que me casé. Y quizás yo tampoco era el mismo hombre. But instead of sitting down and comforting her like I used to, I got up and left. For the first time in a long time, I wouldn't be the one to clean up the mess. That night, I didn't return to the living room. I left her on the couch, alone with her thoughts, while I locked myself in the guest room. My new space. It wasn't a dramatic gesture or an attempt to get her attention. It was simply me setting a boundary. I needed distance, even if it was just a thin wall between us. In the following days, we barely spoke. We walked around the house like strangers, avoiding each other, except for the occasional brief encounter in the kitchen or hallway. She tried a few times to restart the conversation, but I shut them all down. I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Instead, I used that time to think about what I really wanted. I thought about whether I could keep living like this, trapped in a marriage that felt more like a contract than a relationship. I thought about the years I had invested in us and if it was still worth it. But, above all, I thought about myself, about who I had become within this marriage, and about who I wanted to be going forward. It didn't take long for me to realize I didn't like the person I had become. I was tired of giving more than I received, tired of chasing affection that should have been natural, tired of feeling like I was the only one fighting for something that seemed broken beyond repair. And that's when I made my decision. One night, after another day of silence, I walked into the living room and found her sitting on the couch, staring at her phone, pretending not to notice me. But it was obvious by the way her shoulders were tense, as if she was waiting for me to finally say something. I didn't waste time with small talk. I can't, I said. Her head immediately lifted, eyes wide open. What? I repeated, pointing between us. I can't keep pretending that we're fine when we're not. I can't keep giving and giving while you act like just being here is enough. She started to speak, but I interrupted her. I'm not angry anymore, I said. I'm not even hurt. I'm just tired. I don't know if that means we need to separate, if we need therapy, or something completely different. But I know I can't keep living like this. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely scared. So, you're leaving? I shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. But I think we need to spend some time apart to figure it out. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost caved. I almost hugged her and told her we would fix it, like we always did. But then I remembered her words, that she didn't owe me intimacy, and the spark that had kept me going reignited. This isn't just about you, I said firmly. You made it clear what you don't owe me. Now I'm making it clear that I won't keep giving without receiving anything in return. I grabbed a bag I had already prepared and walked toward the door. She didn't try to stop me. She just stood there, crying silently as I left and closed the door behind me. And as I drove away, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not because everything was over, but because, for the first time, I felt like I had a choice. I didn't look at my phone for hours after I left. I knew that at some point, she would text or call. But I wasn't ready to face the words she would have for me. I needed time to think, to breathe without the weight of her expectations or the constant pressure of obligations. I spent the night in a cheap hotel, staring at the ceiling for hours, going over everything that had led me to this moment. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over again. Did I make the right decision? Was this the end of my marriage? Or was this the reset we needed to fix what was broken? By morning, I still didn't have the answers. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to go back. The first few days apart were strange, almost like I was living someone else's life. I had dinner alone. I sat in silence, with no TV playing in the background. I went to sleep without hearing her footsteps in the hall. At first, it was liberating, but then the loneliness started to creep in, not because I missed her, but because I missed the idea of what we used to be. She called me on the third night. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Hello," she said in a soft, hesitant voice. "Hello?" Neither of us spoke for a long time after that. I could hear her breathing, shaky and irregular, and I knew she had been crying. But I wasn't ready to let my guard down just because she sounded vulnerable. "I don't know what to do," she finally said. Her words hit me harder than I expected. This was the same woman who always seemed so confident, so unwilling to admit mistakes. Hearing her acknowledge that she had no answers threw me off balance. "I don't know either," I admitted. "But I know I can't keep living the way we were. Neither can I." That was the first time we agreed on something in months. And for a moment, it felt like progress. But then reality set back in, and the conversation stalled again. In the following weeks, we started talking more. But the distance between us was still there. She wanted me to come home, at least to try therapy, before we completely gave up. And part of me wanted that too. But another part couldn't forget how we had gotten to this point. I couldn't forget what it was like to hear that my needs didn't matter. That intimacy was something she could deny without consequences. I couldn't forget the nights I felt invisible in my own home, or the resentment that had built up inside me over the years. So I didn't rush to go back. Instead, I set boundaries. Real boundaries this time. If we were going to try again, it had to be different. I wasn't going to keep chasing her attention, nor beg for crumbs of affection. She had to show me that she was willing to put in the effort, that she really cared about fixing what we had broken. And for a while, it seemed like she was trying. She went to therapy sessions alone when I wasn't ready to go. She sent me long messages about how she was reflecting on what she said and did. She even stopped blaming me for pulling away. But as much as I wanted to believe her, something still felt wrong. Maybe it was the fact that she only started trying after I left the house. Or maybe it was the certainty that I didn't trust she wouldn't fall back in her old habits once everything settled. In the end, the decision wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would be. There wasn't an explosive argument, nor a sea of tears, just a silent understanding that we had drifted too far apart to find our way back. I asked for the separation a month later. She didn't fight it, and although it hurt to close that chapter of my life, I walked away knowing that, for the first time in years, I had chosen myself. Whether it was the right decision or not, I guess only time will tell. But for now, I know one thing. I don't owe anyone more than they're willing to give me in return. Never again. He did what many of us would hesitate to do: set clear boundaries. Despite everything, it's clear he tried to salvage what was left of that relationship, but in the end, he chose himself. And that, let me tell you, is powerful. Now, tell me, do you think Dell only started trying because he realized he was going to lose control? Or was it genuine? I want to hear what you think in the comments. If this story hooked you from start to finish, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I bring amazing stories like this every day. Oh, and there are 2 more stories on screen waiting for you. Pick one and keep going with me. I'll say goodbye for now and see you next time for another story full of unexpected twists.